What's up, everyone? Ion with AQ Markets here. If you were a day one follower, you used to watch the WTF report every single day. But I'm going to be switching things up a little bit due to some good demand, some good criticism, some good feedback. I'm going to be discussing some macroeconomic topics, some really good economic discussions, certain market news and trends that are going to be present in the news and in the stock market overall. And along with that, I'm going to be also making some videos on how to be more financially responsible and understanding certain concepts that affect our money and our investments that we might not understand fully in its entirety. So if you enjoyed these style of videos, if there's any good feedback you'd like to give, please drop a comment below. If this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you haven't subscribed already, make sure to do that. And before we begin, make sure to like this video. Thank you guys, I hope you enjoy. So ever since it happened the first time, we've been waiting for it to happen again. It's been moving the markets, it's been causing a lot of volatility in the markets. It's basically the big news item that is constantly leading us into market rallies.
All three major averages on track to close to the upside. The NASDAQ, the big story today, up.
And market downfalls.
Uncertainty over the state of lingering stimulus talks in Washington didn't help the mood.
That is the non-existent, all-powerful second stimulus package. Now, this has been in the news, as I mentioned, since approximately May, and it's been going back and forth between Democrats and Republicans, and it just hasn't been passed yet. The election is just in a few days, and we still don't have another $1,200 check. So in this video, I'm going to be discussing the history of the second stimulus package, what's been holding it up, and maybe by the end of the video, you're going to figure out who you're actually supposed to be mad at. Start off with the history of the stimulus packages that were in place to help prevent the economic collapse of the COVID-19 impact on our economy. On March 27th, the CARES Act was signed by President Donald Trump, which was a historic $2.2 trillion package to help fight the economic hardships of COVID-19 on the economy. We got a sick $1,200 paycheck to keep us safe for the whole year. So Congress and the Senate were already thinking, maybe this is not enough. We really need to help people because we are seeing record levels of unemployment. People are losing their jobs, losing their homes, losing everything. So Nancy Pelosi says, hold my scarf, rallies up the House and passes something called the HEROES Act. The HEROES Act was calling for $3 trillion more. It was going to issue another $1,200 check for every single U.S. citizen, and it was also going to allow for $1,200 per dependent. So if you had a kid, you would get $1,200, so forth and so on. It was also going to maintain the $600 a week unemployment benefit that would extend it past into 2021 of January, and if you were a part-time or contract worker, it would extend it even into March 2021. They also wanted to provide $300 billion of eviction and rental assistance in order to help people from getting evicted from their homes and their apartments. And along with that, they wanted to provide general aid to the states in the form of $1 trillion. Now, that last part is what President Donald Trump did not like. He famously said this:
Nancy Pelosi is only interested in bailing out badly run, crime-ridden Democrat cities and states.
So, the Senate, on July 27th, they basically pulled a Rick Harrison when you go to the pawn shop and they say, hey, this is worth something. And then they look at it, and then Rick Harrison goes, the best I could do is, then he inserts the price. And they introduced the HEALS Act, which is a $1 trillion package focused around stimulus checks, but it lowered the maximum income to qualify from $75,000 to $40,000. Along with that, it gave the unemployment benefits still, but it lowered it to around $200 a month, and then it also did something where it would be up to $500 capped based on 70% of the previous wages when you would combine your state benefits, because these are federal benefits, not state benefits. Along with that, they wanted to inject more PPP money, which was the Paycheck Protection Program. They wanted to add $190 billion of that. They also added funding for school reopenings. They increased the employee tax credit, and they also added a little bit of money towards COVID testing, tracing, and treatment. Now, Nancy Pelosi wanted $3 trillion. Mitch McConnell comes back with $1 trillion. And the worst part is Nancy Pelosi came out swinging and said, wait a second, there's going to be no federal funds for state and local governments. You're cutting the unemployment benefits. And then the big poison pill that Democrats absolutely hated was that there was a clause in this new agreement that it would put a 5-year liability shield to prevent schools, businesses, hospitals from being sued over coronavirus-related issues. And she said no. So now let's fast forward to August 13th. The only thing that they agreed upon was the $1,200 checks and absolutely nothing else. And then, unfortunately, with no deal in sight, the Congress breaks for 2 weeks for the Democratic and the Republican national conventions. All that happens 2 weeks later, on September 7th, Mitch McConnell proposes a skinny, small stimulus package for $500 billion just to get something on the ball, and maybe they can talk about other issues later on in life. But this $500 billion was only focused on school aid, jobless benefits, and PPP expansion. The problem was that PPP expansion was $370 billion out of the $500 billion. And the Democrats and Nancy Pelosi absolutely opposed this because it did not have direct payment to citizens who they claimed were hurting the most because of this economic depression. So the Democrats said, wow, you're only going to be helping businesses and you're not going to be helping the people and you're lowering unemployment benefits? No thank you again. So now we come to October. On October 1st, Pelosi introduces the Heroes 2.0, which is $2.2 trillion, as opposed to $3 trillion, which they initially asked for. Now let's talk about what was different. They lowered the additional benefit of having a dependent to $500 instead of $1,200. That's probably the biggest cut here. Along with that, they lowered the overall eviction protection budget, they increased the educational budget and the COVID testing and treatment budget, but along with that, they still wanted the state and local government money. They just lowered it from $1 trillion to $700 billion. And Trump still said,
bailing out badly run, crime-ridden Democrat cities and states.
So then, a few days later, on October 6th, the Republicans and the White House and President Trump basically teamed up and said, let's do this. $1.8 trillion proposal for Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, with the main difference being that they are only going to issue $300 billion for the state and local governments, and that is currently where we are at now. We are $400 billion apart. American citizens receive $1,200 to last them the whole year, and we are running out of PPP money and other bailout money for certain industries, which is leading to a lot of mass layoffs, given that the deadline for their layoffs has already hit. And this is kind of a big problem because there was a lot of anticipation that this next stimulus package was going to get passed before the election. And unfortunately, on October 26th, right before the election, Mitch McConnell decided to adjourn the Senate. So I only talked about the financial differences between the two parties and their stimulus packages, but now let's dive into the bad part, which is the politics. It has a lot to do with bipartisan disagreements, it has a lot to do with animosity and just people being people. Now, unfortunately, the Democrats and the Republicans both had their set of poison pills that they introduced into their versions of the stimulus, so let's talk about those now. Let's talk about the Democratic poison pill that was introduced. Now, as I mentioned, President Trump often said that this is going to be their opportunity to bail out poorly run, crime-infested Democratic cities, as we know. And the real issue is that they were allocating $1 trillion towards this. And what was basically said in a more concise and respectable way is that these cities were already in financial distress. They had huge amounts of debt. A lot of this has to do with mismanagement of resources and mismanagement of money. And the Democrats saw this as an opportunity to bail out some very coincidentally Democrat-run cities such as Los Angeles, such as New York, such as Chicago, places like that. So the Republicans did not want them to have that ability to bail them out and have them start fresh and use coronavirus as an excuse to allow them to do that. So now remember, both parties don't play nice, and the Republican poison pill this time that the Democrats absolutely hated and did not want to allow them to pass it in their form of the stimulus bill was something I mentioned before, which was that 5-year shield that protects businesses, schools, and organizations from any lawsuits that have to do with coronavirus-related issues. Now let's give an example. If you work at a restaurant and you are concerned that maybe the restaurant isn't following any guidelines and you're very concerned and you don't want to report to work because you're concerned about getting COVID and your boss forces you to come in and then you end up getting COVID and you can't cover your medical expenses, this would allow you to have the right to sue. But in this clause of their stimulus package, it would basically prevent the ability to sue for the employee. So the Democrats didn't really like that. They thought that it was very anti for the people, and this is something that they absolutely did not want to get passed whatsoever. Now, another fundamental difference that the Democrats and Republicans had to do with the unemployment benefits, how much was to be allocated and for how long it was going to last. This wasn't necessarily a poison pill, but this is something that could have been compromised had those other two topics been completely separated and taken out. Those weren't the only things that really delayed discussions of the stimulus bill and ultimately led it to cease being in action before the election. There was also the tragic passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg early on in September, God bless her soul. And unfortunately, this was an opportunity for the Senate Republicans to put in yet another Supreme Court justice. This was like taking a kid to a candy store with a giant bag and saying, take whatever you want. The Senate prioritized the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett above anything else in this world. She was sworn in on October 26th, and then Mitch McConnell went right back to discussing nothing. That is when he adjourned the Senate until after the election. Now again, not everyone is innocent here. Nancy Pelosi and the House did not want Trump to get a, quote, win before the election, which would boost his votes and give him the opportunity to go on his campaign trail and him say, I passed the second stimulus for you. So unfortunately, the Democrats also saw this as a very big political piece for them to not allow it to happen. And if they were to let it happen, they wanted it to get it done sooner rather than closer to the election. So as I mentioned, this has been one of the major driving forces behind the market rallies and the market falls every single week that we see. Sometimes it switches off week after week. Sometimes it just is a mixed news within the week. But as you can tell by these memes that are all over the internet, we ended up following a cycle where we would see that there's mutual agreements and the stimulus is going to get passed. Then they disagree, and then the markets go down, and then the stimulus talks continue. It just followed this endless circle. So my personal opinion on when the stimulus package is going to get passed and what the circumstances are going to be is that it's definitely not going to be anytime soon. I say that because if you think that this election is going to be a peaceful transition and if people are going to accept the results and all that jazz, let me just have someone wrap it up for you.
And were they wrong?
Unfortunately, times are very polarized, so I believe that once the dust settles from this election, which can take probably 1 to 2 months, I'm expecting personally that the stimulus package round 2 is going to be passed sometime in January. I hope it's earlier because there's a lot of organizations, companies, small businesses, and families that are being really affected by coronavirus this year economically. So I hope something gets done quick, but my expectation is January. That wraps up this week's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot out of it. I hope it also kind of opened your eyes as to the main problems surrounding the stimulus package and what legitimately has been holding it up. If there's any good feedback, anything you want to discuss, whether it's stock related or this video related, drop a comment below. Don't forget to like this video and make sure to subscribe. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much.